Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Heir's Lair. I'm your host, Jonathan Taylor, and today I have a special guest with me. I pointed the other way around. So, special guest, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Erika McCorkle. I'm also known as Cure of a Wind on various social media. I am an author. I have a book coming out pretty soon. And thank you for having me here today, Jonathan.
Thanks for stopping by. Now, I've actually done an interview with you before, so this time I'm going to do an interview with a twist. And because the twist is something you came up with, I'm gonna ask you to explain it.
Okay, so in my books, there are a group of people who follow a religion where they're not allowed to use money. Instead, they will gather information from people and then sell that information to another group of people who will provide them with food and shelter and all the supplies they need to live. um, the way they gather information is through this game that they call the game of 8 questions, where they're allowed to ask people 8 questions, and those people can also ask them for 8 questions, and the other people can learn various things this way. And it's 8 questions because it's a religious number to their god, who just kind of has a thing for the number eight.
Yeah, and also it is somewhat fitting for a different reason. Namely, your book comes out on the eighth day of the eighth month this year.
Right, yeah, that was intentional. I want all my books to come out on the 8th of whatever month they come out. And then with this book that's coming out in August, we wanted it to come out in summer because it is kind of it's tropical themed and it kind of feels summery in a way. There's a lot of scenes on a beach. So we wanted it to come out on either June, July, or August, and August 8th just worked out well given the release schedule.
Okay. Uh, now with the those details out of the way, as the uh, as the host, I'm gonna I'm gonna now start asking my questions. I have to say something that you didn't mention. The questions are asked and answered like one at a time. So it's not like one person uh, asks a questions and then the next person asks a questions. It's person A asks a question, person B asks the question, person A asks the second question, and so on. That's the pace or the idea behind what's about to happen.
Right, that's how we're gonna do it. In the canon lore, like in my books, they can kind of bend it however they see fit. Like if one person just doesn't have 8 questions, then they might let the other person ask all eight, or they'll let them go twice in a row. It varies depending on how the people want to do it. But yeah, we'll go back and forth.
Okay. Question one. In your last interview, you mentioned Pokemon was one of your inspirations when it came to when it came to writing. So how did your perspectives or your writing intentions shift from writing about uh, uh, com- uh, companion critters with various powers to deities with a specific set of powers?
So even though Pokemon was the original inspiration, there's actually quite a few others that go along with it. I often only talk about Pokemon because that's what people know about. But at the same time, there were Digimon, Monster Rancher, Cardcaptor Sakura, uh, Dragon Quest monsters, like a lot of other games, anime, what have you, that were about raising monsters. And in many of those other games or anime, the the monsters weren't just pets, they were like people. And like sometimes they would have their own societies, their own customs and rituals and whatnot. So that inspired me to create a world where the monsters had their own civilization. So that's kind of how that came about. I don't think my series was ever really about like the monsters were never really companions or pets. Maybe in the very, very earliest stages, but I quickly got out of that, and I don't remember those early stages very well. I was like 9, 10 years old, so it was just a long time ago.
Okay.
So, my first question for you, Jonathan, how do you approach writing about death in your books?
Well, death is given the given the setting and given the stakes that I'm going for, something of an somewhat of an uh, inevitability. And in fact, given that I'm writing about coming of age books, it is to some extent uh, the ultimate point in in that journey. It is like the one thing that uh, that really cements that this is no longer safe. This is what uh, this is what everyone has to confront in order to become in order to have come of age. That is something that that is something that comes up and that I thought would be necessary to confront. And within my books, sometimes people die fast, sometimes people die slowly, sometimes it's brutal, painful, sometimes it's uh, sometimes it's not. And I, I I didn't I don't really aim to explore death, but insofar as death comes up, it is I I try to be um, at least respectful and authentic to it. I wanted to portray it and and how it would manifest, how the characters would react to it with the with the dignity and perspective that that it would have, including IRL. Yeah, that's basically my answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next on question 2. What inspired the worship rituals that you included in your books?
A lot of the inspiration for that just came from other series, various video games and anime. Like, sometimes I'll be watching an anime and they'll have like a magic chant or magic circles, or, it's like wave a wand and something will happen, or some other magic object. So a lot of it just came from that. A lot of it also is inspired by rituals, whether pagan or maybe even not even a belief system that people actually believe in. It's just kind of a for fun thing that they do. Um, I got inspiration just from a lot of various places. But then I also considered, what would be most appropriate to my setting, like what would you do to summon or worship a god of, the lightning element, the stone element, the water element. So I just think about objects and symbols for these elements and how I can implement them in a kind of fun, unique, and like visually interesting way. And I say visually interesting even though it is a book, because I do like to have my readers like envision a lot of things if they can. Obviously, some people have aphantasia and they can't visualize these things. But for the people who can visualize it, I really like to give them a lot of scenery in their head to play with and enjoy.
Okay, and I have to say I'm quite thankful for it as as one of your readers.
I'm glad you've enjoyed it so far. So my second question, on the opposite side of the previous question asked, how do you approach writing about humor, especially in stories that are more focused on like militaries?
Well, it's not like a lot of the public conception about military is that it's uh, overly serious. And given what I and given what I said in the at the first question, like how death is constantly to be expected and how that is always how I try to handle that seriously. that might be something I provocate as well. But truth be told, when it comes to humor, it's really a reaction people have when they confront various various situations. So if you have a certain set of situations, regardless of whether or not it's a military book or otherwise, then humor will ensue because that is how people think. That is how people react to stuff. This is what this is what not necessarily what interests them, but this is how they work through and process the reality around them, or try to make sense of it, and maybe including how they find common ground, common interests. So my situation is something is there, something happens, and one of the potential reactions to it is humor. If you have that, so you have a situation in place, then humor will ensue.
And it sounds like a good way to build camaraderie between the characters as well.
Yeah, that also helps. Okay, question three, perhaps the most loaded of this entire questionnaire. Has your personal relationship to faith and spirituality changed as you worked on the Pentagonal Dominion books?
It's funny that you say this is your most loaded one because this was actually the topic of the podcast that I do with my publishing house. So I like was writing the essay on this when you sent me these questions. Um, and yeah, they have it has changed a lot. So I was raised in I called it a casually Christian household. Um, like we were Christian, but we didn't go to church. We didn't pray. My grandma would read the Bible on occasion, but that was the extent of it, really. Um, I did believe a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to tell what you actually believe in when you're a kid, and you just kind of believe what your parents say because it's like, oh, everybody knows this is true. It must be true. But, as a kid, it's like, well, I don't know, but I know that this is true. I can't see it. Um, But I did believe that, if I was bad, that I would go to hell. And it's like, I don't want that. So I hesitated to do a lot of things just out of fear that, if I write about gods, then I'm going to go to hell because I'm worshiping false idols or however it's phrased. But as I grew and I just kind of grew tired of that, and it's like, why do I believe this? And why am I so afraid of this concept that people invented just to keep people. I, I don't want to say too much in case you have a lot of like Christian listeners and they're now like turning this off. It's like, oh, fuck this girl. Um, uh,
Say whatever.
yeah, I broke away from religion. And I started writing about gods. So, like my characters who I call gods, they have always existed in my head, but before they were just like powerful entities, like the equivalent of like just a really powerful wizard or something. They weren't really gods; they were just magical, powerful people. But once I decided that they were gods and that they were worshipped by the people of the Pentagonal Dominion, I went all out with it. Like I started developing the religion, the rituals, all this fun stuff. And for me, it is fun. Like, I honestly really enjoy writing about fantasy religion. And I think part of that is because I do like writing about power dynamics. I like writing about, lords and masters and kings and all these people who have power over others. Usually I like writing about it because I like writing about them being overthrown. I like watching kings get taken down. Um, But in this case, I also like the idea of, this God who is all benevolent and kind and knowing and is just doing the best for his people. Like that's a dynamic that I wanted to explore in my world. And that was a change that happened as I was writing my books. It's like Lulu went, or I should call him Lucognitus. Lucognitus went from being just a powerful wizard to a very kind god who is willing to do terrible things in order to protect his people.
Okay.
So my third question for you, do you ever feel like any of your antagonists have the right idea?
In short, the answer is no. That's why they're antagonists. The broader answer is that while they might have legitimate grievances, or they might be able to tap into uh, what are legitimate grievances, I, I still see them as representing uh, an an error in judgment, or an error in how to approach given situations. They're not wrong all the time. They might actually have some legit points every every once in a while. They might have some good ideas about how they want certain things to work, but the principles they work off of are in are in some way either insufficient uh, or can be proven to be to be faulty, or to lead to or to lead to wrong results. And from that point forward, you can look in you can look into what it is that makes them uh, what it is that makes these ideas, these suggestions, uh, wrong, and how is it that some people can tell that and others don't, and and maybe even what are the circumstances which made the which made the leaders decide, or which made these antagonists decide uh, this is a good idea. This is what should be explored. So yeah, I'm kind of following the claim George R. R. Martin makes about how the about how his books are about the struggle of good and evil within the human heart, or about trying to do what is best, but not always knowing what is best for for a variety of reasons, and not being able to recognize that what you're doing is wrong, again, for whatever reasons. So I'm not gonna say I'd write it at a scale as sprawling or as all encompassing as either George R. R. Martin or other major writers throughout history, but it is but it is that perspective that I to some extent want to want to touch upon and want to bring out and explore.
Cool.
Okay, my fourth question: what was the I might have to adjust it now slightly when given I know your answers to the previous question, but still I'm gonna ask it as such. What
Go
was
for it.
most important for you when it came to creating the pantheon for the pentagonal dominion, or in this case, I kind of want to know, uh, perhaps from this question forward, how has, and knowing that the pantheon wasn't always a pantheon, uh, is there anything that shifted when you decided to make it a pantheon?
Oh yeah, definitely. Once I decided to make them into gods, that was when I really kind of they had personalities, but most of them kind of changed in a few ways. I decided that I wanted them to not always be in agreement with each other. In fact, for the most part, there's always like a 5 to 5 split in opinion on various things, and it's not always like, these five are always against these other five. Um, it's it's to keep things from just being exactly how the gods want it. For example, there's the there's a society of people. Ophidia, where women are in charge, they enslave men. It's really awful. Um, and when I created this pantheon, it's like, why would they allow this to happen? So I had to create some of the gods in such a way that they would be supportive of Ophidia. So, I had to change some of the female goddesses are pro-Ophidian. That includes Liqua mostly. She is like fully Ophidian. She absolutely believes in what they believe in. And then a few of the other gods don't necessarily agree with the Ophidians, but also don't really know the best way to deal with it or change it, or they think that in order to change it, they have to do it a certain way, like either through a rebellion or through war, or some of them would rather just do it diplomatically. Like they'd rather have the change come from inside. So they're trying to get like their children especially into positions of power and hope that they change things from within. That's just an example. Like all the gods have disagreements, and so when I was creating them, I was creating their personalities to conflict with each other in those ways. But then also they are elemental gods, so I wanted them to in some way embody their element and like how do they use their elements? What powers do they have over nature? How does that affect, what they do on a daily basis? And then how does that affect how people see them as a person and as a god? For example, Windosaur is kind of an asshole, but he is the wind god. He does care about people a lot. Like in general, he might hate individual people, but he really loves society. So he made it so that there are no tornadoes, hurricanes, none of that. Like there are no wind storms that are like super destructive or would kill people. He still has windstorms on occasion just because it's good for nature to have storms, blow seeds around and stuff. Uh, but he doesn't do destructive stuff. And as a result, a lot of immortals perceive him as like a very benevolent god, even though he is a jerk. So,
Okay, noted.
so my fourth question for you, how have your political opinions manifested in your books?
In a wide variety of ways that I could actually make a a whole separate video about. Starting perhaps right from the beginning of my life, just like every other middle class white boy, I have been told I was special, at least once. So, and yet I still kind of experienced a little bit of burnout, and or I have had some levels of perhaps deception or disappointment that my specialness didn't translate into broader results, and you know like and aside from looking within to figure out what it is I'm doing wrong, I also decided to look outward a bit and figure out whether or not someone else is doing uh, something wrong. That so yeah that so that idea of developing the younger generation is something that stuck with me, and it is something that I look towards when creating my books. Also, the the villains of the villains of the broader series, or at least the villains of uh, the first part of the series, definitely the first book, are basically theocratic fascists, because that is something I've seen. That is something I've seen rise up, and that is something that uh, I wanted to counter or confront uh, in some capacity on some level. And also, as I was writing the book, I also kind of got bread pilled or radicalized uh, towards non-entrepreneurial economics. So that kind of flowed a little bit more into my into my world. More so in my second book than in my first. So that's something that some people might notice, assuming they look for it, and if some people uh, and notice it without looking for it, I maybe they'll say, huh, that's kind of cool. So in short, the answer is there are actually uh, a lot of ways through which my ideas about what it is that makes a decent society, or that makes a functional, sustainable, long-lasting society. Uh, those ideas towards that have flown into this book. They are however a little bit reframed due to the necessities of the story. Among them, the necessity of having a military, and perhaps even the necessity of having like a professional police force. I don't really go too much into that, but suffice it to say, they exist. A uh, I don't necessarily agree with like stuff like how I'm not exactly sure how to put this. There are people who go ACAB, all cops are bastards, and therefore any kind of organized police force is bad, and it should all be community watches. I am. I do not. I can't really say I subscribe to that idea. At least not as of. At least not as of right now. So I still have something like a professional police force and a professional military. In my concept, the state still has these instruments of force, even though some of the political opinions I subscribe to would look upon things like this with a little bit more skepticism.
That's cool. Yeah, I got this question from I was going through your Twitter. I was trying to think of ideas for questions, and you had retweeted a lot of political stuff. I'm like, ooh, I gotta ask him about that because I am also what you might call bread pilled. I don't talk about it on Twitter a lot because there's a lot of fucking weirdos on there who'll think that I'm like some political party that I don't actually believe in, but I don't know. It's very confusing. And people are easily confused by me, so I just don't talk about it on Twitter, but I do have also ideas about like what the perfect society would look like. And that is kind of where Alosia is headed. They're not there yet, but in the future they'll be there.
Okay. My fifth question. We've already talked about video games and such. So, are any of the plots or events that you describe in your books inspired by or based on something you encountered in video games?
Yeah, so I've been inspired by like so many video games, especially like Japanese RPGs. And also just Western RPGs as well. But in the early stages of my world building, I played a lot of like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Lunar, Grandia, those kind of games. And a lot of it was more subtle, just world building stuff. As far as like specific plots and events, probably the most obvious example, like if anyone has played this game, you might like be able to draw connections, is Sunless Sea. Um, like in Sunless Sea, this is a game where certain concepts are like you can like they're countable items, and that includes like secrets. Like if someone tells you a secret, that becomes like a tangible item in your inventory that you can buy or trade or sell. And that was kind of the idea behind, even this whole game of eight questions thing, is that, knowledge is like a thing that can be traded or sold. I don't treat it exactly like a tangible thing that you put in your little box, your your cargo hold. It's like and then like you lose it. I understand how and why Sunless Sea does it. Um, I think it's a little silly, but um, that is where I got that idea. And some of the other like plot lines are um come from Sunless Sea's ideas. Like that game does a lot with like memory stuff. Like you can have like a this bee goes up your nose and takes your memories, and like you can then if you eat the honey made by that bee, then you can get that person's memories. I don't remember the exact details, but things like that I play with in some of my other books. The idea of like sharing memories through like this weird convoluted process. So I owe Sunless Sea a lot of my inspiration.
Okay, that was a little bit weirder than I thought it would go, but thanks for
Um,
sharing.
you're welcome. So I know you have like an AU story. How did you come up with the idea of doing in like an alternate universe story?
Um, well, I already mentioned that I was a that I was told I was gifted as a child, and that oftentimes the ways I was gifted didn't really didn't really translate into the real actual world or in the things I actually um, I actually wanted to do. And so the question of what if, the question of what it would take for me to actually to actually realize that or to actually make that happen is something that I've encountered and tried to work through on uh, in a wide variety of different cases. So having my own characters deal with that is seems simply like uh, a logical next step, particularly because AUs in general have a lot of have a lot of potential as storytelling devices, as of looking at various storytelling conventions or events throughout your story and trying to piece together how how they interact or how they pan out. I'm not gonna say it's an underexplored topic, but I will say it is an underserviced topic, if I may say so myself, because oftentimes they use or just you know take take this character and put him in a different setting. So that's how you get stuff like coffee shop AUs or bookshop AUs or high school AUs or stuff like that. But if you instead take the fundamental premise of your world and and then if I can use a baking analogy, you're taking the same ingredients that went into making your world, maybe even the same ingredients in the same proportion, but you decide to mix up the batter for like 3 minutes too long or something like that, or you decide to preheat the oven at a different temperature, or you decide to uh, or you decide to uh, alter at least some of the at least some of the layering within what it is you're baking for whatever reason. What do you have that comes out is still some variation of a baked good, of a cake, but it is
And hopefully it's edible.
yeah, hopefully it is but it is different. It is obviously different, and looking at the ways in which it is different is something I wanted to look into a little bit, and especially given that uh, uh, I actually kind of had some luck with something I managed to write in about about the AU story. It also kind of ties it into original sin because yes, I also have somewhat of a casually religious upbringing. So I had, well, one more thing I could explore, one more thing I could direct my energies towards, and that is something I found worthwhile, both as a general creative exercise and for the sake of allowing my characters to grow and explore the world as I have as I have presented it. Okay.
All
Uh,
right, cool. Thank you.
yeah. Next question. I believe this is my okay. This is my sixth. I, I kind of had to count them through. Um, we've already talked about your deities quite a lot, so let's talk about the rest. What aspect, when it comes to creating the rest of your character cast, what what is it about them that comes to you first? So, what are the aspects of your characters that come to you first that you built upon when that you build upon when you are writing your characters?
So this one is a challenging question because it has a my answer is not going to be satisfying, and that is that it depends on the character. Sometimes I'll have just a name and like a personality, and like I want to build a character with, with certain tropes in mind. Like, maybe I want to write like a snarky know-it-all kind of character, or maybe I want to just write kind of a wallflower type character. And then I might not even know what they look like, so then I have to build all of that, and then I have to decide their relationships. Sometimes I'll like have a character, it's like I just know I want you to be connected to like these other two characters. So I know their relationships, but I don't know anything else, and I have to build that. Sometimes I'll have like a physical idea, like I'll see them in my head. Like I have an idea for, they're gonna be, this species, that element. They live in this part of Alosia. Um, but like I'll have nothing else. So I'll have to develop their personality from the ground up. Um, so yeah, I mean, very unsatisfying answer, but it varies by character. And just to give an example, for my upcoming book, MoLab, there were the three starting like parents, they were my three starting characters. I knew I wanted to write a book about polyamory, so it's like, okay, I'm gonna have a husband, a wife, and like a non-binary spouse. Um, I I decided that I wanted the husband to be the viewpoint character. And that was just a decision I made kind of at the beginning. I was originally going to have the three merchants be intersex male and female, though I've since changed Teen to not be any gender, so so much for that plan. But I still have Amier as being male. And so when I started writing MoLab, I knew the main character was going to be male. And I needed to give him a wife and a non-binary spouse as well. Um, so that's kind of how Liesel and Sue started. It's just knowing just that they're related to him in that, like, not related, blood related, but like their relationship to him. Um, I wanted Liesel to be the same species as Amier, uh, but I didn't decide what species Amier was until like quite a while. I wanted him to be a lightning elemental, so I looked through like my list of lightning elemental species, and I was like, okay, I don't really want to do Yosue, the goat people, because I wanted him to be like really strong as well, and the Yosue are kind of not strong. They tend to be very small and weak. Then there's like the Alta, which I thought about, and it was kind of my second option going in. But I decided not to do them because I think they're almost too human. Like the things that make them like alien are things that you can't really see like in artwork, and I really wanted something that would be visually different. Like if someone looks at a picture of Amier, it's like, oh yeah, that's not a human. So I did end up with going with the Winnels, who are my lion people, lions, tigers, all the big cats. So I made Amier into like a lion man. And then I decided, okay, so his wife is also going to be a Winnel, and I decided she could be a tiger. So I developed her design. And then I still didn't have like a personality for her. Um, how I developed her personality was I wanted her to kind of be different from the other two. Like Amier is very sensitive, very and in um like after the daughter dies, he is very withdrawn, very he's just sad. Like he focuses more on like, oh fuck, this is my fault. How he, it's hard. I can't put this into words. Like I just wrote this 800-page book about all of his emotions, and now I'm struggling to put it like in one sentence. And then Sue is like trying to. Sue is the non-binary parent. He's the one who is trying to keep the family together while they're all kind of falling apart. And Liesel, her approach is more anger and like also withdrawing in a way, but also kind of being angry at the other two for not reacting to the traumatic event in a way that she really understands. Because one thing that Amir and Sue do is that they realize that, oh, physical touch, being intimate feels good, it's a distraction from the pain. And Liesel thinks that that's like really disrespectful to their dead daughter. She's like, why are you two kissing each other like a week after our daughter died? That just feels really bad. So that's kind of Liesel's approach. So I developed her personality to react to the other two.
Okay.
All right. So, my sixth question for you is, do logistics ever become a concern in your military-focused stories?
Um, yes and no. I I kind of look at this perspective when it comes to logistics. I actually uh, approach that from a perspective that the readers themselves could also follow up on, and I think the main perspective the readers follow up on is the perspective the characters are are also uh, observing this issue through. So from that vantage point to the characters, logistics is basically, well, we need we need this. So and if you say that you need this, then it either comes, or there is some uh, or there is some reason why it's not being brought. Why is it not being brought? Well, maybe it's needed somewhere else, or maybe it doesn't exist at all. So I'm sad to say that from my current perspective, the the issue is treated uh, the issue is treated rather superficially. But as the series develops and the characters will perhaps be expected to take on more responsibilities, and including in terms of oversight and in terms of logistical command or logistical duties, then they then that could be expanded, and that could be expanded upon as well. They could be able to say, okay, this unit needs weapons. This place has weapons. Get it to them as soon as possible. Um, I do, however, in my upcoming book have some questions of logistics, or rather public administration, that are explored from a broader perspective, because I have characters interacting with the emperor. So there are some so there are some questions, or there are some uh, points of view, or operations that are that where you have this broader look, we have this broader look upon this issue, upon this question, and still and it doesn't really take up too much of the um, you know too much of the book. So for now, my approach to logistics is only mention it if it is relevant to the to the story or the plot thread at hand.
That makes sense to me. I have always just really been into logistics, just as a concept. And it's one of those little things that I haven't written a military focused story yet, but if I do, I kind of want to have a more logistics focus on it. So that's just my personal writing quirk, I guess, is that I just love logistics.
Okay. Question 7. Did you learn anything while researching for your books?
Yeah, I mean, overall, over the last 20 years that I've been world building, I have researched a lot of stuff in general. For every world building topic you can imagine, clothing, religion, geology, chemistry, biology, just everything. But to keep it specific, for MoLab, these characters, they live in a tropical place. They live on well, technically they live on the equator, so it's technically equatorial, but it has that kind of climate that you would expect to see in like Indonesia, Philippines, tropical islands, some places in India. So I did a lot of research into what it was like to live in that kind of environment. What kind of foods are available, how you might build a house there. If, also if it weren't modern times, obviously in modern times there's, globalization, a lot of trade. They can get materials that aren't easily available. Um, But for Moab, like I wanted the main family to live in a house made of bone, so they're a bit of an exception. But I wanted like everybody else to have like houses of like bamboo and like mud brick and like made from wood of like trees that exist in the area. Like I looked up koa trees, I think is how they're pronounced. It's Koa. They grow on Hawaii, and like I read about like what Hawaiians would use these trees for. Like they would make boats out of them. So like at one point I have Amier in a boat, and he says that it's made of koa wood. Um, so just things like that, the climate, the food, the animals, just what it would the humidity. Like I mentioned humidity a lot and like how they combat humidity. Um, that's a lot of the stuff I researched and learned about while writing Merchants of Light and Bone.
Okay, interesting.
So my seventh question for you, uh, this also kind of goes back to video games. Have you ever gotten an idea for a battle, um, or I said battle in my question, but you can broadly take this any way you want. A relationship conflict, for example. Have you ever gotten an idea for any kind of conflict from something you did in a video game?
Well, I don't know. The kind of video games I typically play aren't really aren't really ones you can uh, match up to the kinds of things I typically write. I so at least not in terms of, if we were to look solely at like combat or military engagements. Well, the closest equivalent to that in terms of what it is that I've played is either Battleship or the Civilization games, and there are plenty of perhaps obvious reasons why that experience doesn't really doesn't really translate well. I can say I learned a little bit more about about strategical awareness and battle tactics when in by reading I don't know, the Winnetou books by Carl May. Um, in general, uh, in general, a lot of my inspiration for conflict scenes comes more from actually comes more from visual media, movies and TV. When it comes to arguments or conflicts between characters, that is uh, those are again not necessarily or not specifically unique to any given video game. I'm pretty sure someone could someone who reads my books and then has played like one specific video game where the plots are somehow similar, or where something that or some occurrence is somewhat similar, might be able to point to that and say, so that's where you got it from. It is in 999,999 times out of a million, I will not have heard about whatever this person thinks I'm referencing. So yeah, that's kind of my perspective. Everything I come up with um, uh, is either inspired by visual media, or is in some way based upon something I've noticed or derived by myself when looking at some form of visual media. Like someone is someone's writing up a battle scene, and I was thinking, but what if this happened? Stuff like that.
Okay.
That's my answer.
Yeah, I like to play a lot of like either, high level strategy like grand strategy games or, like on the ground battle games like Mountain Blade. So I definitely get ideas for battles from especially Mountain Blade.
If anything, if anything, I think the closest inspiration for my fight scenes is actually Naruto, or
Oh yeah. Yes.
like other uh, you know martial arts ish fantasy anime, because those have powers, those have uh, uh, organized state enforced instruments of violence, and uh, and they have and they have the let's just say the I'm blanking out on one specific word. They have the motivational systems in place to where something like a large scale armed conflict within a fantasy setting would be you know would be plausible or would be expected. With some
Okay.
yeah, but with some adaptations, given that my magic system is somewhat different from theirs, and and also the scale I work on is perhaps a little bit different. But a bigger inspiration might in fact be might in fact be historical. If I'm to be perfectly honest. Okay. Question 8. What is the I think we kind of touched upon this a little bit, but this will be a little bit more in depth. What is the main difference in public structures or power structures or public administration between the real world, our world, and the pentagonal dominion? Uh, or as I said, there are certain structures that motivate why it is that our world works as it does. Does the pentagonal dominion work off these same structures? If not, how are they different? If yes, is there any other aspect that motivates a difference?
So it largely depends on like what society we're looking at. I kind of there are a lot of societies in the Pentagonal Dominion, but the two big ones are Ophidia and Alosia, and they are both very different in how they run, public administration and power structures, and very different from the real world as well. Ophidia is, I call them femi-fascists, women are in charge, men suck, men are slaves, and they're slave owners. And for them, public administration is basically women are in charge and men do all the manual labor and all that gross stuff. And again, the power structure is also set up to encourage that. Like, in order to be a noble, you have to own slaves. So, and also nobles have more voting power because Ophidia is technically a republic or a democracy or whatever you want to call it. Uh, but it's set up so that you can literally purchase votes. So the richer you are, the more politically powerful you are. Also, nobles just get more votes automatically, but to be a noble, you have to own slaves. So you would have to be in support of the system in order to continue the system, basically. You can't be a noble and be like, I hate slaves. I hate I hate the system of slavery. I love men. I'm gonna end this system. Because if you believed that, then they would see you as a huge hypocrite because you can't be a noble if you
Yeah.
believe that. Um, so that's Ophidia, lovely place. Alosia is like the polar opposite. Alosia is it's an empire that did start off kind of in a very imperialistic way, like, the emperor had conquered a lot of very small countries. And for a while it sucked. But the big difference with him is that he is largely welcoming of all these other smaller countries. Like, he was very kind to them. He didn't really oppress them. He welcomed them into the empire and helped get them set up, and he was helpful to them. Like, he helped, bring trade routes, and like his military would protect them from, at this time, this was the time Ophidia was becoming very powerful. So he would protect them from Ophidian slave raids. Um and also this was the time when demons were also like way more powerful than they are now, so he would protect these smaller countries from demons. So even though it was, imperial conquest, for a lot of people it was beneficial because it protected them from way worse monsters out there. Um, so now, well, it depends on where in history we're talking about now. In the year 300, which is when my Greed Wars books take place, all the vassal nations, they're very happily under the emperor. But there is some strain going on with, mostly with capitalism. Like, capitalism just sucks at this point. Um, it's terrible. There's just so much greed, and the greed is destroying everybody. There's like a very small noble class, um, and also like capitalist class, business owners, those kind of people.
Yep.
And they are very heavily oppressing the workers, the peasants, all those people. And the Greed Wars is about that conflict. But then when Moab takes place, that's 250 years after the Greed Wars, when like it was a big eat the rich moment during the Greed Wars. Like, a lot of nobles
Quite
were
literally.
killed. Literally, a lot of them were literally eaten. Um, and there is still capitalism, but it's not what it was, and it's not what it is in the real world at all. Alosia has actually implemented a system of basically a maximum wage. Like, you just cannot make over a certain amount of money. Um, there are loopholes that some people have figured out, but often, like if you're found to be using these loopholes, like, you'll be exiled to Cosmo, so, you know, don't risk it. Um, and also there's different rules for like businesses. So, like, a business can accumulate X amount of money to put toward whatever project they're going for, but then like their individual people can only make X amount of money in a given time. And that's a hard and fast rule. Alotian banks are like very well established and like watched over. Like, Um, like you can't really fuck around with the banks, and also because Alosa is like the only country you can really do anything with, it's not as easy as like, oh, I'm just gonna take my money and put them in this other bank. You know, like if you put your money in a bank in Cosmo, they'll be like, what the fuck are you doing? And if you go to Ophidia, it's like, okay, well, you're Ophidian now, so that's an option only available to women. And if you do that, then you're not Alosan. Like Alosa will be like, okay, you're not a citizen here anymore. So go enjoy being a slave owner, I guess. Um, so yeah, Alosia has very tight control. Some people would probably think it's too strong. I think it's good the way it is, but I mean, they have their flaws. You know, they can be a little too controlling, but I guess nothing is perfect. So. They are in the year 561, which is when Molab takes place. They aren't a moneyless society yet, but they are headed that way. And I think in about another 200 years, they will be a moneyless society. I want to write solar punk books at some point, and so that's the vibe I'm going for. Like I kind of just want to be a solar punk utopia in about 200 years.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
Thank you. I don't know if I'll ever write those books. I have plans for like the next 20 years of my writing career, and none of them are the solar punk books that I want to write. So we'll see what happens. Um,
Indeed, we'll see.
my my eighth question for you. So this is kind of related to the above question. Have any real life historical events ever inspired something in your books?
I won't say that there have been. Well, I already alluded to with my no, with my last question about historical inspiration when it comes to conflicts. But let's say when it comes to individual historical engagements, those might be interesting as a reference point. So you understand how various units would have been uh, employed at various times, depending on the logic of whether or not they are short range, mid range, long range, what kind of what kind of utility they bring, and how do you translate that utility when when your troops don't really need uh, weapons or equipment to make that happen. For example, you don't really need binoculars when you got someone who can literally take like uh, a cutout of a cutout of their own vision and just magnify it, enhance it. Or similarly, you don't really need listening devices if someone can just like put their hand on the ground and from the vibrations that are coming through the ground, they can tell they can tell whether someone's digging a tunnel or whether or not someone is communicating any kind of military plans from like 5 miles away. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, that's perhaps a useful reference point. When it comes to larger events, I the overall flow is not directly similar to any to any individual event, but the but it is to some extent directed by various tendencies I've encountered, particularly in terms uh, of the empire within the backstory. It it went through an expansionist phase, then an expansionist phase that led to an era of somewhat of a decentralized command. Decentralized command that soon started to break down for a variety of reasons, which then morphed into a more centralized command structure. And then once that centralized command structure uh, was incapable of reacting to a certain situation, it it sort of broke down, but then it kind of tried to be centralized again, uh, even but it tried to do so like subtly, sneakily, so that it was still um, so that still on paper there were lots of individual points where decisions could be made, but in practice, a lot of those individual points where decisions could be made were still made in accordance to uh, what one particular entity said it should be. So uh, now my setting is in what I would call uh, a true decentralization phase, or a true mm, or a true uh, regionally autonomous but nationally ordained phase, if I may if I may say so myself. Even, there are still larger currents at play, and also when it comes to but however, when it comes to individual conflicts, even though there isn't a one-to-one analogy, there are uh, broad strokes where I could say where I could kind of draw a comparison. The Republic War, the one that led to the end of that led to the demise of the uh, backstory empire. I've kind of at various stages compared to both the Great War, or the First World War, and the Yugoslav wars. And in fact, in many ways, I've actually said that my that the current that the current political situation within the setting is somewhat analogous to Europe in the 30s, as in they have some level of widespread civil or social rights, but there is still some debate as to whether or not these rights are really necessary, or whether or not the people who have those rights could not in fact use them to uh, to start a kind of trouble uh, is that is seen to be destructive. And sometimes the kind of trouble that can be caused is not necessarily judged by its outcomes, uh, but by who is purported or believed to potentially carry it out. It's not really something I've been digging too deeply into, but it is something um, I present as a possibility moving forward. More so in the first book, because the first book touches upon these broader social questions. But in the second book, even though it arguably has similar stakes, the actual points of influence uh, through which these stakes play out are smaller and more focused. So they are not explored as broadly. Within the next books in the series, the question of these larger social changes and these larger forces that will shape the history of the setting will come right back, and will serve as a point of influence, or a point of discussion, a point of conflict for these future events, future uh, developments within society.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering my questions.
Well, thanks for asking them, and thanks for giving me your answers as well. And also thank you to everyone who either listened or watched this. Your attention is very much appreciated. If you also enjoyed what it is you've been exposed to, then please leave a like, maybe even share this video wherever you think other people will like it as well. If you have anything you'd like to add to either answer or the works of either of us, that's what the comment section is for. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe. And ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. My debut, Heir to the Empire Next Generation, is available under a master link in the description down below, right past all of my social media links, which I suggest you check out should you choose to. Its sequel is also coming soon, so now might be as good a time as any to to actually seek it out and get yourself primed for the for its sequel. Alternatively, you can also support me on Patreon, where you will also be able to receive perks such as early access to both my videos and my scripts for both this channel and my second one. Until next time, I am Jonathan Taylor, and this has been the Heir's Lair.